Good morning. It is Thursday, the 4th of May, and we continue our exploration of the book of Paul's letter to the church in Colossae, Colossians. Chapter 2, verses 8 to 23 is the passage we looked at today. I want to just pause and say what an amazing letter this is that Paul writes to the church. And I certainly want to encourage you, exhort you even to read it yourself. Perhaps if you're following this, then just read those portions of scripture that I reference. Obviously, over the weekend, I don't do these little talks, so you can just read ahead. But it's a short enough letter that you could read it carefully every day almost, and really read it carefully. And if you have, as I do, a study Bible with little exegetical footnotes, then read those, having read the passage, and reflect deeply on what it says, and also perhaps reference a commentary, one that you find easy to read and very helpful, because this is a powerful letter. Today, Paul continues the theme. Obviously, the whole letter has this theme. So every day when we read a portion of it, we obviously always reference back to the main theme. A church, a young church, a church that Paul had never visited. He's writing to it from prison because he has heard the stories coming out of it. A church that was being cleft apart by heresies, those coming in with their own particular agenda. And no doubt more than one heresy, more than one grouping bringing their own agenda to bear. Some may have been really trying hard to be very religious, but were bringing their own understanding. We might put the Judaizers into that, those who were Jewish and thought that the Christian faith, this new faith, had to really be another form of Jewish worship. And then, of course, there were those who were coming from a more Greek background or some other nationality background and were bringing in their mystery religions. And so a form of syncretism where they would keep those aspects of their traditional religious beliefs and merge it with those parts of the Christian belief that they particularly liked. Examples of this, although it also stands as quite a separate heresy, is that of Gnosticism, even perhaps, and be impressed with my big knowledge of words, Docetism, which believes that Jesus wasn't fully human. He was some kind of a spiritual force that looked human, but in reality, he was really just God in disguise. That might be a very simple, hopefully not simplistic, definition of what it is. So all this undercurrent that was taking place, and Paul writing to the church uses those key words that I referenced yesterday, words that people would have immediately understood because these were the words that the Gnostics or the Docetists or other of the mystery religions or the Judaizers would be using. The secret knowledge and the mysteries, the favoritism perhaps even that God would have. So if you wanted to be a true Christian, you not only needed faith, you needed secret knowledge. You had to follow certain rituals. And I want to suggest that even to this day, there are aspects, probably in most of the churches, some more than others, where particular rituals are important. So you have to be a Christian, but you have to, and this is just by way of example, not a condemnation of the whole movement, but as being a Christian, you have to actually exercise a tremendous amount of the more Old Testament Jewish faith. So you have to use Jewish words and Jewish rituals as if anything else is insufficient, or the clothes that you wear are somehow indicative of the extent of your faith, or the speaking in tongues. There's a very common one, perhaps more common from the 70s and the 80s at the start of the charismatic renewal, where if you didn't speak in tongues, then you weren't really a Christian. And to show that you were a Christian, you had to blab forth loudly, vociferously, frequently in tongues to somehow indicate that you had faith and were a Christian. Or you have to have dreams and have words of knowledge. I know people who insist that you must be able to quote huge extents of scripture. And as good as all of that is, as good as speaking in tongues is, it on its own is not an indication of your faith. And so Paul is challenging the people, exhorting them, pleading with them to put Christ first. He is the head, and the rituals that we as humans develop around us, and those rituals have an important role to play, but do not let them control you. So I'm not against rituals and certain practices, but those instances where the ritual becomes more important than Christ, we need to be cautious of that. And that's on one perhaps fairly superficial level of what Paul is talking about here, because remember, his actual writing is about the heresies that were drawing people away from God. And so some of the more simple rituals that we follow help us to become guidelines and barriers to keep us on the straight and narrow. And there's great merit in that, but don't let the ritual control you, and don't impose your rituals on others. And as I said before, and let me conclude with this, don't let those who practice their particular rituals or of a particular church that's now becoming somewhat cultic, and any church can become cultic by stressing the particular ritual that they want you to follow, whether it's what you dress and how you worship, and whether you must sit or stand or kneel to pray, and what songs you sing, etc., etc. And if you ever deviate, then you're a bad person. That church has lost the plot. So be cautious of churches that force this upon you, and that delicate balance, that certain rituals, certain churches have particular ways in which they operate. Don't simply throw that out of the window, because you could be throwing the baby out with the bathwater. So be wise, be focused on Christ and on Christ alone. He is the head. And anything else which distracts you from Christ is a false humility, says Paul. It's a false imposition of something that is actually not of Christ. So folks, complicated, but read this incredible letter from Paul to the church in Colossae, and read it with a little commentary or set of footnotes, because it really is a wonderful book to read and slowly digest. Have a good day. We'll chat again tomorrow. God bless.